So welcome everybody. This is the Hudson Valley Flood Resilience Network Lunch and Learn. Today our topic is on coastal floods and the Stevens Flood Advisory System. We have a few announcements before we get into that, so I will get going with that. I'm going to share my screen. So the Hudson Valley Flood Resilience Network, we bring local governments together that are committed to taking actions to reduce and manage their current and future flood risks. We just finished up a strategic roadmap process earlier this year. And one of the exciting things that's come out of that is we have this website to help us communicate who we are and to hopefully recruit other communities to join us so we can continue growing our network. So the link there is hvfloodresiliencenetwork.org. We can throw that in the chat for you. And we encourage you to check out the website if you haven't already, where you'll learn kind of what we're about. And if you go to the Join FRN page, you'll see our two kind of membership options. We have members, which are representatives of municipal and county governments in the Hudson River estuary watershed. And we really center local governments in this network because that's really where the rubber hits the road when it comes to flood mitigation planning and all of that. So if you're on this call, we're hoping that you've already filled out one of these forms. Right now, we have been functioning with like a list of email contacts, and we're going to retire that at the end of the year. So if you haven't filled out a form yet, we're going to lose you in our communication. So please do that. I'm going to click. Well, before I do that, I want to show these are our current FRN members and partners that have filled out the form. And we also encourage many individuals from specific municipalities and entities to complete the form as well, just so we have some redundancy and that can, improve our resilience so it doesn't fall on just one person from each location. So this is what the form looks like. Gives a little introduction about who we are, some group agreements, and then information about you so that we can better serve you. And I should mention too that, so even though local governments are members, we also have this partners category. This is kind of everyone else that's important in this flood resilience process. So staff from agencies, regional organizations, and private sector consulting firms. Our final announcement is that we are having two in-person meetings this fall, one in Albany and one in Yonkers. So we're trying to cover the entire length of the estuary. And we encourage you to attend the meeting that fits with your schedule and location. They're going to have similar agendas, but they'll just be in different locations. And these in-person meetings are kind of the bread and butter of FRN. We get great feedback. It's really an opportunity for you to come together with your fellow FRN peers and discuss these topics. So the Albany meeting, the main program is going to be from 1 to 4 with lunch at the beginning, and then the site tour, which will be a driving tour from 4 to 5. And then the Yonkers meeting, the main program will be from 10 to 1:30 with the site tour in that last half hour, in case that helps you, if you can't commit to the full 12 to 5 time slot for Albany. And I'll mention that we have some great tours lined up looking at green infrastructure projects and a shoreline project and some green infrastructure in Yonkers. All right, so with that, I'm gonna get back to our main program here. So the topic is coastal flooding, which is really relevant. Could be some flooding happening in the next 24 to 48 hours. And there's also coastal flooding is projected to happen next weekend as well with the full moon. So a timely topic that's only going to become more important in the future. So today we have Dr. Philip Orton from the Stevens Institute of Technology. He's going to tell us about the science of coastal flooding and as well as the Stevens forecast, about the Stevens forecast advisory system. And then that's going to be followed by Julie Noble, who's a sustainability coordinator at City of Kingston. And she's going to tell us how the City of Kingston has been using these forecasts to plan and prepare for flooding along their waterfront. So with that, Philip, if you want to take it away. Oh, Philip, you're on mute.
Thanks, Jessica. Happy to be here and meet some users. Some of you already know, and also some prospective users of our forecasts. So I'm part of a big team at Stevens Institute. David Reynolds, our system administrator, and then everyone else listed here are scientists. Also, there's a few not listed, Alan Blumberg, Nikita Georges, who helped create the system, even a bigger role than myself. 15 years, 10 years, 7 years ago before they left Stevens and moved on to private companies. So that's a picture of Stevens Institute. Also on the Hudson, we're down in Hoboken. All right, so I'll give an overview, pretty brief, a couple slides on Hudson River valleys, coastal flooding, tidal flooding, storm surge flooding, plus riverine flooding issues, an overview of SFAS, brief assessment of its accuracy in comparison to NOAA. One thing that goes unsaid here is that NOAA also provides forecasts, sort of the official government forecast. We're an academic institution, so what we're doing is research, trying to improve upon what NOAA does more locally for our region, not having to do the same thing for the whole country like they do. And that's what we generally have done at Stevens. And then lastly, the users, the uses, and other information on our system, where we're going with it in the future. A little comparison of the historical floods for Manhattan at the ocean end of the system versus Albany. And of course, there's all these places in between that are sort of in the middle in terms of their flood risk. At New York City, famously vulnerable to tropical cyclones and nor'easters that go by off the coast that cause strong winds and cause storm surge. And Sandy was a real outlier, although we do know there were some hurricane storm surges back in around 1821, and around then there was another one that were similarly bad. So it's not that Sandy was a complete outlier. At Albany, the floods are driven much more just by the stream flow, by the rainfall and the river inputs. So that's the opposite end of the system, and that can be tropical cyclones that create a lot of rain, like Irene. It could also be, and Irene's on there, 2011 as one of the taller spikes, taller event, the worst events, more than 4 meters. And the y-axes in these two plots are in meters, and they're pretty different. At Albany, you could have about an 18-foot water level is the peak of 5 meters on this plot, whereas at New York City, it's about 11 feet for Hurricane Sandy. But those are much more driven by the rainfall. Interestingly, before they managed the Hudson River's watersheds, there was more frequently more high floods. And also there used to be ice dam sort of dams that would form from all the broken ice in winter, and sometimes they would hold up a very big flood that would suddenly break free. So some of the worst floods, that could happen back then, we don't have them anymore, thankfully. But these, both places, tropical cyclones play a big role. At Albany, it's more these inland nor'easters that maybe send a lot more rainfall up there instead of the storm surge. Very different kinds of storms. So we account for all those. We had a study funded by NYSERDA, the New York State sort of energy research and development authority, and a website called the Hudson River Flood Impact Decision Support System. If you can remember that, if you want to look at it, you could write it down. It's sort of like a flood mapper for just what can happen. It's not anything to do with our forecasts, but it uses the same models, the same computational models of water that we use in our forecasts. And so this mapper shows what sort of the flood zones, you could call them, for tidal flooding, for extreme event flooding of all different extremes, plus sea level rise impacts. And it's sort of designed for municipal planners and such, so it's got a lot of data that you can download on vulnerabilities and things like that. And I think that's a really useful mapper. It accounts for the rain-driven river water level rises in addition to the tides and the storm surge, so that's fairly novel, unlike what FEMA provides for their flood zone mapping, and a much wider set of different scenarios of flooding, like I said. And so I think that's just a brief summary. I'd be happy to talk more about Hudson River history of flooding and flooding problems. But yes, as you know, it can come from tides, it can come from extreme events, from rain. It can, it depends on where you are along the system. If you're near the ocean, then it's much more driven from the ocean. If you're up the river further north of Poughkeepsie, especially near Albany, it's much more driven by the rainfall. And so talking about our flood advisory system, it has a front page which shows, it just provides forecasts for these discrete locations. It's not a mapper at this point. There's no flood mapper associated with these data, although we'd love to move in that direction. It provides water level forecasts, and one main novelty is that it's really useful is it provides an uncertainty range on those forecasts to capture sort of the near worst case scenario, because the weather is unpredictable. The timing with high tide can be unpredictable also, so those are important factors. It includes the river effects on the coastal flooding, or the tidal flooding, we could call it. It sends emails for flood watches and advisories, which I won't talk more about, but I can talk more about that later if useful. And then lastly, and I know some people here use them, and we'll hear more about Kingston's uses of those advisories later, I think. And then it does have higher resolution models and some more detail that NOAA doesn't provide, such as the really detailed inputs from all the rivers, even large and small in the area along the Hudson, which helps with our accuracy. And you can sign up for those email notifications on this front page in the white blank. And we tried to be consistent with National Weather Service by using some of their same metrics of flooding on our plots, major flood, moderate flood, minor flood. And there's also some assessments that one can download on this front page. It's not shown in this version of the front page. This is a little bit older, but there you can look at our annual assessments of accuracy of the forecast. And I'll show some of those results today. So the forecasts going into the future are the sort of pink or magenta lines of water level, and this is about 5 days of time. The current time is always shown with the vertical dash line, and in the past you have observations at most of our locations, so those are the red dots. And so you can see how well the water level forecast compares to the observations. After the fact, this is what's shown several days later. I downloaded this image, so it's just showing the past tense. And you can evaluate the accuracy, and it's generally pretty accurate. And like I said, we've been evaluating that accuracy. And you can also compare it to the different flood metrics as shown here. I'll just show what's behind, what's under the trunk a little bit. We have these dynamic water models that account on grids of 300 by 300 in the large scale Northwest Atlantic, and locally the local domain of more regional. And there's a time-dependent water level in the top right that I'm just showing. So this is all my own computer plotting software. It's not what's shown online. This is Hurricane Sandy. You have lines of constant pressure for the storm center. You've got winds as the arrows. You've got the storm surge on the left. You've got the total water level with the tide and storm surge on the right. And so basically these models sort of they budget for the movement of the water itself and the momentum the water has, and how the wind pushes on the water, how the tides influence the water levels, how the freshwater inputs influence the water levels. Actually, that's kind of a cool thing. Maybe I won't show this one on the left, I'll just show this one on the right. But it does also capture the river input on the Hudson, as shown here. I'll forward a little bit through here. When you do have the peak water levels, and after, sometimes you'll get a little bit of a rise. You can see the flood wave travel up the Hudson. With Irene, you also then see a response in the Hudson from all the rain. There's a river flood at the very northern part of the Hudson during an event like Irene where there's a lot of rain. Sandy didn't have a lot of rain, so there's no river flood in that case. So the way that we get an uncertainty on our forecast is that we run our model about 70 times now currently every 6 hours. And those 70 times, and that's both those models. The very large scale model gives information to the regional model, and then that runs. And And so about 70 times every 6 hours. So we put out forecasts every 6 hours. Those 70 different runs come from different weather models. So we capture all the uncertainty in the weather, which is a dominant factor, even more so than the uncertainties of the ocean forecast model. The weather models and the weather forecasts tend to be most important for storm surge. We do add some uncertainty, account for the uncertainty in the ocean water modeling also. So this runs on a supercomputer at Stevens, and we also run hydrologic models, the river models ourselves for the Hudson, and it all comes together in our forecast system and that you see on SFAS in this forecast. Like I said, we have these error bars. I didn't talk about the error bars. So it's a 90% confidence range. So the upper error bar is the 90th percentile water level that occurs. So 1 in 10 times, the water level might be even higher. So pretty rarely, or no, it's the 95th percentile, I take that back. It's a 90% confidence interval from the 5th percentile to the 95th percentile. So 5% of the time, 1 in 20 times, you might find that the water level even exceeds that if the system were working perfectly. And that actually tends to be pretty accurate with our model, that 95th percentile. It very rarely gets exceeded, but it does sometimes. So it's a near worst case scenario. And that is what we hear is the most useful thing for National Weather Service and for a lot of people, is just for emergency management, you got to know what might happen, not what the most likely thing is to happen, although those are both useful. The most likely water level forecast is the gentle line. And that's based on the weather, mainly on the weather uncertainty, weather prediction uncertainty. So yeah, we use these different global, the US model is GEFS, ECMWF is the European model, the Canadian model. We aren't actually running as much because it's not as accurate. So we pile all these different weather predictions together and make the ocean and river prediction. Our comparisons from 2020 data that are in our recent annual reports were more accurate. So the RMSE is the error, the root mean squared error. For PETSS is the NOAA forecast that's similar to ours. It has an uncertainty associated with their forecast, and it has higher error by about 15%, not dramatically higher. The x-axis is the extremeness of the storm surge. So at the center, it's when there's no storm surge, it's just mainly tides, and we're doing better when it's just tides causing tidal flooding. But we're also doing better when you have a big storm surge on the right, or a big blowout where the sea level is actually lower than the normal tide prediction on the left. We actually do a lot better in those cases. And those are important to river pilots, for example. We know that the Hudson River pilots are very concerned about running aground if there's a very low water level. And then this is another metric, less well known. It's the coverage of uncertainty. It's the amount of the time that the water level in our forecast, that the observed water level later on is found to have been within our uncertainty estimate. So if we have an uncertainty range of 90% uncertainty, 90% of the time the water level should fall within that if our uncertainty estimate's good. And that's what the horizontal dashed line is in yellow at 90. And our forecast for different storm surge amounts is pretty darn close to 90% of the time that uncertainty interval, the water level ends up being within it. And so that's a good sign for our system. In 2020, NOAA's forecasts from PETS were they're still learning, I think, and they were really not getting the uncertainty right. So we definitely do better on providing an uncertainty estimate for our forecast. So you can trust our 95th percentile pretty well. We're pretty confident about it. And that is one of the triggers that sends out alerts 3 and 4 days in advance to people's emails, is that 95th percentile. And it's kind of an extreme warning. Only 1 in 20 times is it exceeded. And a lot of the times the water level might be significantly less, but it's good if you want to have a warning of 3 to 4 days out, you should be looking at the forecast, because there is a chance there will be a flood that hits the moderate flood threshold from NOAA, which can be pretty damaging. And last thing I'll talk about is the data users. The National Weather Service, all along this whole region from Maryland all the way to Maine, use our forecast data. We share our data with them, the number data. Some energy organizations like Con Edison, U.S. Coast Guard, Search and Rescue. And then a big funder of us has been the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey. We've really relied on them heavily. We provide localized forecasts for all their facilities in New York, New Jersey metro area, That helps us keep our systems running that are for everybody, for the general public. And I just put these up more from a prior marketing presentation, but without reading these quotes, I mean, we definitely have some users. We'll hear more about that with the next presentation, but a broad range of users of our forecast data, especially for emergency management. And some final notes or conclusions. We have a new project that I'm the PI on, where we're scoping out creating a new website because the current Stevens Flood Advisory System website's pretty old, getting outdated. We think we can improve upon it. So we'll be serving users by email. We'll be having some workshops to learn about user needs, and we're looking toward creating a new website within a few years. We're always in need of funding to keep our forecast system going, to analyze it, to improve it. It's not necessarily in the Port Authority's interest that we be providing products to people other than the Port Authority, or improving the system that, you know, serves people from Maryland to Maine. So if anybody ever has ideas, we're always really eager to hear about that. We did unfortunately stop providing data downloads on the forecast page, so you can't get to the numbers right now, and probably never again directly from that web page. There was a problem where bots were scraping our data all the time, and it was dragging on our servers. And then we had a big, this summer there was a huge upgrade to Stevens security, Stevens Institute wide security effort, and they shut a few things down, and they were doing stress tests to see if we were vulnerable, and some things came up as being vulnerable. So security is a big concern. The need for funding is a big concern with our department chair, because this really isn't funded except what we do for Port Authority. And so we're definitely looking for more funding. And then legal concerns, you know, at that point the general counsel was involved, and I guess, you know, you can imagine there's concerns that if our forecasts are wrong, that someone might sue us. And we you know, so that's another concern where she's pushing us to have legal agreements with users of our number data. I mean, the good news is you can still see the forecasts online. You can infer pretty well what those water levels are without having the number data, but we hope we'll be able to provide more of those data to people. I'm seeking solutions for that, including, you know, for New York City, we had some communities that use our data, and it's, you know, definitely dismaying that they can't serve their communities anymore, giving them a map of the flooding that they were creating themselves. So we're trying to get New York City to, you know, potentially fund us to give away the data to anyone in New York City, for example, so that people have more access to those data. I think that's it. I'll be happy to answer questions when we come up for Q&A in a little bit. Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. We've got a little bit of time, so if you don't mind, I'm going to share my screen really quick just to show you the interface. So this is the Stevens Flood Advisory System. I'm in Ulster County, so I use the Norrie Point tide gauge. So when I go to register for my email flood notifications, it's the Norrie Point one that I use. If you're further south, you might use the one that's in Piermont, right there. And you just click on that point. It's blinking right now, so I think that's telling us that there's some expected coastal flooding in the next 24 hours. And then that pulls up the interface that Philip was showing. And I did want to ask you one question. So there are a couple of these, like Norrie Point, say you live in Saugerties, and you know, there's this one for Tivoli Bays. Like, why might someone want to use Norrie Point versus the point at Tivoli Bays on this?
So point at Norrie Point again?
Right here.
I mean, your proximity is of most interest, right? And what was your question?
So I guess what I was getting at is that not every point on here integrates these observations, but Norrie Point does. So that makes it a little more accurate, yeah. I think.
And so Tivoli hasn't had observations for a while? I'm kind of dismayed at seeing there's like 5 stations without any data, the ones that have the M in our
yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I can look into that. I can't remember what they're the Rico stations, some of the Rico stations only, which is strange. when there's no observations, the forecast is still pretty useful, but it is nice to have the observation, and you can look at what's happened the past day. Has it been inaccurate? You know, has it been as accurate? But I still think even when there's no observation, the forecast should be really useful for those stations, and other stations along the Hudson can kind of show, you know, the accuracy. Our model constantly, based on the past 24 hours, if there's a bias, an error, then it changes the forecast for the next 4 days to correct for that water level error. So it corrects for sort of like the mean water level changes that might arise to things that aren't in the model's workings, which really is one of the tricks for making the forecast better. But yeah, you can look and learn from, you know, learn from past experience, I think. But yeah, the more stations, the better, right? I mean, in the long run, it'd be nice to have this thing have continuous data. This is the kind of thing we'd love to do, but we're scoping out what could be more useful. And there's even Buzzard's Point. Is it called Buzzard's Point? There's some station that got created from NOAA along the Hudson that we don't have in our system, but it's actually a lot of effort to add new stations. And since we haven't had, that's the kind of thing we'd love to have funding to do, but there's really nobody to do this kind of improvements to the system. It's a big challenge.
All right, great. Thanks, Philip, so much.
Yep.
All right, and so now I think we're ready to move on to Julie Noble, Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Kingston, to tell us about how she's using these forecasts.
Thanks, Jess. And I'm going to just bring up my screen. Is everyone able to see that?
Looks good.
Great. So my name is Julie Noble, and I am the Sustainability Coordinator for the City of Kingston. And today I'm going to give you an example of how we as the City of Kingston use the Stevens system. This is just what we do, but I'm going to walk you through how it works for us. So as a reference, the City of Kingston is located in Ulster County. We are 90 miles north of New York City and an hour north of Albany, right on the Hudson River. And we are also located on the Rondout Creek, which is a tidally influenced tributary to the Hudson rather. And our waterfront area, our downtown, is right at the confluence of the Rondout and the Hudson. So we experience an incredible amount of rain and flooding. Rain certainly this spring and fall and summer. But what you can see here is some historic flooding that we've had in our area. You can see the pictures that are depicting 2005, 2011, 2012. 11 and 12 were hurricanes Lee and Irene and Sandy. And you can see on our waterfront where these levels have come up and inundated our downtown area, which is ripe with businesses, restaurants, cultural institutions, and a public beach. And so up until at that time, of course, Sandy and Irene were more recently the largest storms that we had, making a big impact on our waterfront. What it normally looks like, and I use the Norrie Point data. So Norrie Point is 5 miles from here as the crow flies. And I use Norrie Point as my data source. This is kind of a normal time period here in the City of Kingston. This is what our tides look like. We have a 4-foot tide differential generally. And on a normal day, you know, this is the kind of pattern that we would be seeing. And some days it gets to be something that causes an alert. So for instance, on October 9th, 2021, which was not a big storm, I believe it was a pretty sunny day, although you can see overcast clouds here. You can see that the levels were a little bit more extreme, and you saw that we've had flooding impacts on our waterfront. So this picture in the middle here, it was a weekend, a Saturday, I believe, and we had lots of people parking in this area. We had a couple of events going on, and no one is expecting it whatsoever. And at this time, we weren't monitoring any kind of forecasts. And so, as you can see, there were many cars underwater. not great for us. And obviously this area here was the parking area for a couple of big events on our waterfront, and people got back to their cars and didn't even realize it was going to be this way. So we started to see that, you know, we needed to do something. And luckily we got introduced to the Stevens Institute forecasting. So here's what I do. I, as a sustainability coordinator, I review the Stevens data daily up to 4 days out. So every morning I come into my office and I bring up the webpage on my screen. And if the minor level flood is forecast at 4 feet or above, and we use the elevation of NAVD 88, if it is above 4 feet in our area, then I initiate an alert plan. If only the uncertainty, that gray section, is above 4 feet, I wait. I say, you know what? That's a lot of uncertainty. I don't want to red flag anyone. I don't want to shout fire in a crowded room. I'm going to wait a few days. If the forecast model itself, if the forecast is above 4 feet, I send out an alert, and I'm going to go through how I do this. I continue to monitor it, and I will resend updates to my team as the forecast changes. And I also receive notifications from the system, and I encourage all of our staff to do so. And if I'm going to go through how this whole thing works, but basically this is the plan, which I created out of nothing existed before. So here's an example of an alert that I would send. And as a reference, I sent one this morning. I'll tell you about who I send it to in just a moment, but literally this is the kind of thing I would send. Hi all, based on the forecast and the impending rain, we'll be seeing tidal flood on the Rondout waterfront this weekend, starting around Saturday evening. Right now it's forecast at 4.5 or 4.6 NVD 88 at Norrie Point from 6 to 10 Saturday, Sunday, and Monday nights, with the most intense rain right now forecast for Saturday. As a reference, December 23rd, which I'll talk to you about in a moment, hit 5.1-ish at Norrie. And then I put a link for the data. And I put a note in here to my folks that I send this to. Based on these levels, what we've seen at 4.5 or 4.6 is minor flooding. Water will cover our East Strand, which is a road where our water treatment plant is. Water will cover the parking lot at Kingston Point, which is our beach. Water may cover Delaware Avenue at the Beach Road, which is our access road to our beach. Water at these projections should not crest over the bulkhead and come up onto the land at the Maritime Museum or at Old Savannah, which is a restaurant. If levels in fact exceed 4.25, the lower level bolted plate at the wastewater treatment plant should be installed on the air vent on the east wall of the main building. All of that means wastewater treatment plant people start to protect. And then I say, please advise, this is our engineer, John S., please advise. I send out that note. Now this came to fruition for the first time that we actually used this was December 23rd of 2022. December 23rd of 2022, here's the conditions. I got this message from NY Alert, which I also signed up for, so I get alerts all the time. This is what they said. The flood warning was issued on December 23rd at 6:55 a.m. until that evening, basically telling us the flood stage was going to be at 9.25 feet in certain places, and we were going to be experiencing flooding in our area. What you'll see on the right is a screenshot of what ended up happening and the results from the Stevens Institute flooding forecast here. What you will notice is an incredible spike, of course, on 12/23 on Friday at 12 p.m. And I'm going to show you what that looked like in real life. Now, just to compare year over year, the exact same date. So 2021, which was just a normal year, that same date, the 22nd through the 25th. On the top, you'll see what our normal flood, where normal high tide and low tide looks like. And on the bottom, you'll also see that I included the forecast for the Rondout Creek at Rosendale. Now, I told you that the Rondout, the confluence of the Rondout and the Hudson comes together at Kingston. But up creek of the Rondout in the non-tidal section, there's also another gauge. So we're able to look at that gauge and understand what's coming downstream to contribute to whatever we're already seeing and our forecast that we're already seeing on our Rondout from the Norrie Point. So I take into consideration, what is Norrie Point saying and what's going to be coming down the creek from the Rondo. So on the normal Christmas time, 2021, nothing was coming down the creek from the Rondo and the tides were normal. On the right-hand side, 2022, this was December 23rd, you can see this extreme spike, which was combining with, I believe it was storm surge, full moon, and high tide, and water coming down from the Rondo. So here's our timeline. In November 2011, November 11, 2022, Jess Coonan here on the call, she said, hey, you know what, Julie, are you guys aware of this Stevens Institute system? Do you use it? I said, no. She offered a training for our staff. So we included our fire department, police department, building department, planning department, parks department, all different folks. And we did a training to understand the system. All my colleagues said, oh, Julie, you should check this every day and you should let us know if there's an alert. I said, why should I check it? You can all check it yourselves. But everyone said it's much easier if you just check it, Julie, and you let us know so we don't have to worry about it. I said, fine. So I started to keep an eye on it. And on December 20th, I started to see the projection 4 days out that there was going to be an incredible spike. I sent out an alert. There's a doozy coming up. Turns out this was the one to justify us doing this. We coordinated all the parties together. We had a site meeting on site. The mayor's office issued a public statement. The event was on the 23rd, and we held a debrief after that. And I'll walk you through what that looked like. Just to say about how we were bringing people together and the tool we were able to, the actions we were able to take by seeing this data. I sent this note out on 8 a.m. on the 22nd. This is the day before. I said, we're obviously all alert on this, but to bring it all together, Stevens Institute is predicting this will be the largest storm surge event since Sandy, though it's significantly less impactful. We've connected with Old Savannah, that's a restaurant. They're putting sandbags out, and they've connected with our fire department. We've connected with the Maritime Museum. We're providing them sandbags, and they'll be getting filled today at Kingston Point Beach. Our parks laborers are all securing our materials, our equipment, and are elevating everything at risk at our maintenance barn and kayak building at the beach. The Parks Department is closing off the softball parking lot at Kingston Point, although at some point I'm assuming that the police department will need to close off the entire road. Laborers from the Parks Department are securing our electrical supplies at Gallo Park in collaboration with Patrick, the marina owner. Contractors at the wastewater treatment plant are aware, they're under advisement, they're installing their flood barriers, and the Department of Public Works is securing additional infrastructure and roads. We're checking on this throughout the day on predictions. I said, we got this. So this is just me looking at it, talking to my colleagues and saying, all right, we got to coordinate. This is what ended up happening on December 23rd. I took about 1,000 pictures. This is Old Savannah on the left. This is the restaurant that I said needed to get sandbagged. They did have to sandbag. The water came through up and beyond the building. This is our wastewater treatment plant folks pumping out their kitchen in the middle of the event. This is the Hudson River Maritime Museum, who prepared with sandbags, but not enough. It went higher than they thought. They ended up having a $30,000 loss that day. But they said without the predictions, it would have been substantially higher. This is the Clearwater on the left, the boat that's supposed to be in the middle of the water on the dock. It is in the middle of the water on the dock, but the dock is also underwater. This is our mayor on the right, who was my husband, and he was capturing a floating propane tank that was in the middle of the road, floating down on the strand. This is our electrical equipment in our TR Gallo Park that is all underwater. This is what the road looked like in front of the buildings. That is a church on the right. On the left, it's the road with the Maritime Museum. This was getting to the height of the event. These are homes on the left top that were underwater. This is my kayak building on the bottom left that I said we need to prepare for. And this is me standing in the middle of the road with a truck that chose not to slow down and absolutely swamped me driving by down at Kingston Point. And this is what our waterfront looked like from above, from the 9W bridge above the waterfront. The photo on the left is our local newspaper photographer, and I was standing to her right. We both took the same picture, the same space. This was at dead high tide. This was at the highest tide of the time. And as a reference, those pictures I showed you way in the beginning were from Hurricane Sandy, which were nearly identical to these pictures. And this was not a hurricane. So here's some feedback I got from my team. Now that the holiday is officially over and the waters have receded and the campus is drying out, I can take a minute to tell you how grateful we all are at the Maritime Museum that you sounded the flooding alarm that you did. Those extra couple days gave us time to prepare our buildings for what was a significant flooding event. The fact that we all got through as well as we did is 100% due to your calm and clear warnings that came in time for action. We're very fortunate with the early warning and helping of the fire department and my construction friends installing the sandbags. This is from a restaurant. We really had no damage other than loss of business that day, and the cost of purchasing sandbags and paying crews to install. We had no damage. That is from Old Savannah Restaurant. You saw the pictures. They were open within 2 hours later and open for dinner that night and had their parties that night. I was shocked how underreported it was in the news, and even the weather stations acted as it was another rainstorm. Everything you told us would happen did happen. So I've created this flood impact guide. This is entirely anecdotal, but basically this says, okay, when it's called a flood level of near action, minor flood, moderate, or major, that's the names that are used by the Stevens Institute. The depth in NAVD 88 we're looking at is 2.75 feet to 3.5, 3.75 to 4.25, etc. The impact, again, is anecdotal. So when we see 2.75 to 3.5 here in Kingston, it means the water covers our east strand at our wastewater treatment plant. That's a road. And it gets to the plant at 3.7 to 3.92. If it enters the dry half of the parking lot at Kingston Point, when it gets to 3.7. At 3.75, it's 1 foot away from going into the Old Savannah deck, the restaurant. At 4.25, we have to put in the bolted plate at the wastewater treatment plant. At 5.06 at Poughkeepsie, now I also reference Poughkeepsie, the water comes over the bulkhead at the Maritime Museum. At 6.05, it goes into the Old Savannah building. And at 7.5 or higher, we need to close all of our flood barricades at our wastewater treatment plant. So who do I share this with? When I started this, which was December 2022, I shared it with 10 people. The marine owner, the DPW folks, rec department, building safety, the Maritime Museum director, wastewater treatment plant, fire, police, and communications, and the mayor. Literally, I was just saying, which one of my colleagues should know about this? None of this was ever established for it to be a formal alert system. None of this was like calculated. We didn't have a plan. This was literally Julie saying, wow, I should really tell people if I'm aware of it. More and more people learned about it, and I realized if I'm going to be telling people, I need to tell more people. So now included in my list are the Department of the Environment, NOAA themselves, the Old Savannah Restaurant, Hudson River Watershed Alliance, Hudson River Cruises, which is a cruise ship, our engineer, our environmental educator, the radio station, emergency services on the county level, the property owner of all of the apartments on the waterfront, the Maritime Museum staff, and the waterfront apartment manager. I didn't think that I would need to use this alert. And now, including today, because I sent one out this morning, I have sent 20 alerts to this team since December of 2022. 20 times that the water has gotten higher than the 4 feet level here in our area. And so what are the limitations? One, the onus is on me to check the forecast regularly. And I normally do it on weekdays. This is not a regular thing that I do. I have no training in this whatsoever. I'm literally just someone that is a good communicator and cares about my other colleagues and my community. And I do this, and I'm willing to do it during my workday. Which means if I'm on vacation, if it's a weekend, if I'm busy, no one's checking it. And there is no redundancy. No one else is saying, Julie's not doing this, we should check it. The forecast data is based on the Hudson River forecast. So and maybe Philip can correct me, but I don't think it's accounting at Norrie Point for any of the flooding that's coming down the Rondout. So I have to look at both to see what kind of upstream influences there are. My recommended actions are literally based on anecdotal. I've said to myself, okay, well, I think at this height, we see this happen. So I'm making those recommendations. The reference to elevations are anecdotal again. So like at 6.05, I believe that's about when it hits into the Old Savannah building. My recommendations are not official. So they're not going through our legal team. They're not going through the mayor. They're coming literally out of Julie Noble's mouth and saying, I think we should close this road, or I think you should be buying sandbags. They're absolutely discretionary and they're subjective as to my opinion on what should be happening. Our list is not directed to, nor meant to be directed to the public. And so somebody beyond me with more authority than me is saying, okay, I'm going to take this information from Julie and decide if we need to take action on it. And the only communication I'm having with folks is via email. So further actions that we have taken, we've created a flood preparedness guide for our downtown. We never had an evacuation route or any kind of, get out of here, know what to do when you need to evacuate. So we created that as part of this flood resilience network. We have a website just for disaster preparedness. We created the Swift 911 emergency notification system where folks can get an email or a text from us. And to reduce the anecdotalness of this system, I'm working with Ulster County Information Services folks, and we have gone out and plotted with GPS hundreds of individual locations, and they are geolocating those with the thousands of pictures I took on December 23rd. And they're saying, and they're using that to compare it to the Stevens data. So they're saying, okay, at this time in this picture, the water got to this height and we're at this location on the land. And at that time, according to the Stevens Institute, the water was at this height. So now we'll be able to say, okay, when we know that at this elevation of water, the water gets here, as opposed to Julie just guessing. And we're hoping to be able to reinstate funding for the USGS flood gauge that was at Kingston. So if you want to find out more about what we're doing in Kingston, you can check out our website, kingston-ny.gov/sustainability. And these are just some more flooding pictures. And that is what we do. So I'm going to stop sharing, and if folks have questions, happy to take them.
Thanks so much, Julie. Amazing work you're doing. I think that just highlights that this is a huge gap in coverage of these events, and alerting people to what's happening. We're kind of in a the Hudson River is not really considered coastal. It's a river. It's tidally influenced, but it's not on the forefront of people's minds that we're experiencing flooding that's coming from the ocean. And if anyone would like one of those trainings that I gave to Julie, I'd be happy to do that. Just shoot me an email and we can get the right people in your community together. So I've been looking in the chat a little bit. And so I think in response to Julie, you weren't sure if the Nori point was capturing the flow from the Rondout, and Philip says this is basically true. The model takes that and puts it straight into the Hudson River, but it doesn't capture the local topography. So that's why what you're doing by collecting those photos and matching those to the water levels is really essential for alerting, the community. Philip, did you want to add to that?
Nope, that's it. I was just looking at I was hopeful that maybe our model did go up the Rondout a little bit, but it doesn't. No, it just sees the Hudson, and it puts the water, it accounts for all these river inputs into the Hudson, but it just puts it right out into the main area of the Hudson. So it doesn't really see what really is needed there is to have a model like ours go up the Rondout, and then it can have the water all merged together in the model and actually have a higher water level around Kingston, on the river side, on the Rondout River side, but it does, none of that's in there. So.
Yeah, and I think one of the key things from that day too is all of our alerts. We're talking about the rainfall, but not really the storm surge that was happening that peaked around noon that day in Kingston.
Right. Yeah. Those National Weather Service warnings were about the Rondout River more so, right? So they weren't really warning about.
Yeah. And that's what's so hard is to understand the difference between the precipitation-based flooding and the coastal flooding and bringing them together. Did anyone else have questions? Emily?
I have a question. Can I ask it?
Oh, of course.
I don't want to get in front of anyone. Okay. So, Julie, I just want to thank you so much for all your work on this because it's so inspiring. And just the way that you've described all aspects of this process, I think is so, so helpful to understand, the pros, the cons, the nuance, the process, like how this all came together. And it's so helpful for us to get those email alerts and seeing who else is on that team, so to speak, of like that internal team of who gets this information. And I'm wondering if you have any plans to alert the public, right? Because you said this is not really meant for public consumption. This is about internal operations. And at the Hudson River Watershed Alliance, we get questions. So it's very helpful for me to know that this is going to be happening. But in terms of like the next level of communications, like would the radio station play a role in that? You know, what is your vision for how that might roll out?
Yeah, so it's a great question. Again, when I first started this, it was literally me like, hey bros, in my other offices that I work with, look at this flooding that's going on. Are you aware of it? And then more and more people were like, oh, like we totally knew that information. And so I assume it's going to continue to grow. However, so in that process, the radio station found out that I'm doing this. And they said, why aren't you sending this to us? We need to know about this. And I gave them all these reasons, like what I just told you all. This is Julie. This isn't like scientific. Like this is based on forecasts, but it's like me saying, hey, everyone, I think you might want to close the road, right? And it's not vetted by our legal folks. So as it is, I'm saying to myself, well, maybe it's just objective. I'm just giving people the information they can make the decision, but I'm not. I'm actually going beyond that and saying like, hey, the road's actually going, like the water's going to go over the road probably, and it's going to do this. And from that, my colleagues call me. The fire department calls me and says, do you think we should close this road? The parks department that I work in calls me, do we need to close this parking lot? And so me, which started out literally just looking at this data, which was something I learned about randomly from Jessica telling in a training, has now become like our official alert system. So when I talked to the radio station, they said, you know, and they've gone through training because they fully understand the ramifications of their actions. And that it is on, so there's two things also I'll talk about, the governmental message and the radio message. From the radio station's perspective, they fully understand that they can't be like, world, Julie Noble says that the water's going to be over 4 feet. You need to do X, right? So they need to manage the fire and do it very carefully. So we don't have any kind of agreement or anything that says, when you get these things from Julie, go out to the public with it. And I've said to them, this is just the data. I'm not sending this because I'm trying to red flag anything. And frankly, you probably shouldn't go out to the public with this unless we have multiple sources of things that are coming at us saying, this is happening, the mayor's saying it, NY alerts coming through, NOAA's doing all this, all these things, because otherwise it's anecdotal from Julie. And so we don't make it public. From the mayor's perspective, on that anecdotal flood impact guide that I have, if my list gets to be like, water's going to get inside of all Savannah, or if our list is something that we know based on anecdotal evidence that life or limb are at risk, health or public safety is at risk, then the mayor will put out a message. He will go through his communication office and say, and again, he will gather more information than the Stevens data. He will gather it from all different sources and say, you know, we're saying this, we're seeing this, we're seeing this, please be advised. So, and all of my colleagues that receive this know that that is the case, that this is really meant to be internal. And frankly, I'm surprised that I haven't been told to stop doing it because I haven't caused yet any major catastrophe. And frankly, if I wouldn't have been doing this, December 23rd, there would have been thousands of dollars more lost, if not other things lost. And I'm not patting myself on the back. I'm just saying, like, literally all I did was look at someone else's website and say, hey, looks like some water's coming. So that's all to say, it's really not a great system. I'm sitting here telling you all, it's flawed in many, many ways, but we are doing something about it. And I don't have a great solution because the reality is in the last 9-10 months, the water has come over the road 20 times. 20 times. We leave barricades down at the waterfront because the road has to gets flooded that often. And so unfortunately, people become complacent in our area. It's like, oh, the water's over the road again. And so it now in our area has to actually be pretty extreme for folks to be like, oh, we should do something about it, because it just comes on the land a lot.
Thanks, Julie. Klaus, I see your hand is up.
Yeah, we had a similar evolution, but slightly different in Piermont. And Nathan can speak to the official phase, but it started out, whenever the Stevens Institute system started, that I had sent around first to my immediate neighbors emails using Stevens. And then as the word got around, the email included the fire department, the police department, the mayor, and a total of 100 people that lived within the coastal, meaning Hudson River, tidally controlled flooding zone. And interestingly enough, I always included a statement to each of those alerts that this, I take no legal responsibility for the accuracy of this. And not only should they not take it for granted when I send them something, but not sending something is a good possibility, and there can be flooding without me alerting them, which is an important thing to say, because when I was on vacation, of course, I may have missed something. And luckily, we have a guy like Nathan Mitchell on our village government, and he realized that this ought to be more formalized. And maybe, Nathan, you can take over what you did and where it stands right now.
I think Emily has a question. I see her hand up. So I can wait if you want to ask that question first, Emily. But yeah, I'm happy to speak to it. And Julie, I have to say, I think it's terrific what you're doing. And one of the things that you did that I thought was great was identify the shortcomings. And the biggest one is I have to look at this every day.
Yeah, and I just want to note that we are coming up on time, and Dr. Philip Orton has to take off. I'm happy to stay on, but just a huge thank you for him presenting today. And Nathan, I think that the end-to-end system, which is what I think you're talking about, probably merits another lunch and learn, so we can, dedicate some time to it. But Emily, did you have a question or comment?
Yes, it was, can you hear me? I'm on my phone.
Yep.
Okay, it's kind of similar during, I think it was Sandy, or it might have been Irene and Lee. I was aware of the NIHAPS model with Stevens, and I was also aware of the stream gauge information, and I was getting gauge information on my phone. And I asked Julie maybe Julie knows more about it. I can't remember anymore, but you go on USGS and you can you can be alerted so that when water's coming down the round out, for instance, they'll alert you when there's a certain height. And, so I was down there thinking, wow, why does the restaurant and why doesn't the Maritime Museum know about this? And I just would say that I personally called some of them after the fact so they would know how to use that alert, not NIHAPS, which was the Stevens model, but the USGS. So I'm really glad that this is finally getting broader use, and that everyone, and that there's being action taken. I will say that that NIHAPS went down. This was during Sandy, because NIHAPS went down because Hoboken was flooded. So I was sitting there using their website, and then they went down completely because their buildings were flooded. Anyway, so thank you for this presentation.
Thanks, Emily. Yeah, thanks everyone for attending. Thanks, Julie, and Philip. And just to close it out, there's probably going to be coastal flooding next weekend as well. Like I said, I'd be happy to do a training for anyone that wants it for their community. And then, yeah, just check out our FRN website, fill out those member and partner forms, and register for our upcoming in-person events. So thanks everyone, and have a great weekend.